everybody. Thank you so much for coming out to Segue. Tasso, I'm trying to remember, did we decide to have like a really amazing reading today, or were we like, nah, let's have it be mediocre?
Check my notes real quick.
Yeah, did you just look into that?
It's kind of difficult. Oh, yeah. I think it says here we're gonna have the best reading of all time today.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I'm glad I showed up for this one.
May 8th, right?
Today's May 8th, yeah.
That's the day.
All right, we're gonna have an amazing reading. That's fantastic news. Thank you so much for joining us. We are extremely honored and delighted to have Peter Dimock and Lisa Jarnot reading today. I'm Ian.
And I'm Tasso.
And Sarah O'Connell is not visible to you, but is very much making it happen as the third member of our team.
The transcript renamed Sarah. Oh, I got it right. It said Sarah Economy for a second. But Sarah is so talented, she might as well be the economy.
There's an expression that you don't hear very often. Also just wanted to say, because a few people texted to say that they were unable to get into the chat, but Sarah, who makes things work, has fixed it. So you should now be able to chat. And please do, we can't see you, but we'd love to hear from you. Say hello in the chat. I also wanted to say, I was asked to say that Segue has now been partnered with Artist Space for a little over a year. And there's a tentative plan being put in place beginning in the fall to move back to in-person readings, as Segue did for decades before finding its way into Zoom, but while preserving the online broadcast element, so that if you're in New York City, you can show up in person at Artist Space and be at a reading. And if you're elsewhere or that's not easy for you to do, you can watch on computer from home. And if you have thoughts about this idea, James Sherry would love to hear them. James, maybe you want to hop in the chat and just let people know how they can reach you if they do have some feedback on that plan. Would you feel comfortable going to hear poetry in a place with other people? Who feeling comfortable and going to hear poetry are often, you know, that's, if you can hold down those two in any circumstances, you're doing pretty well. Are there other announcements before we get going?
I don't think so.
All right. Then I'm going to have the pleasure of introducing Peter Dimock to you right now. Oh, the one other thing I was going to say is there's a $5 suggested donation. You can pay that by Venmo or PayPal, and we'll have a short break between the two readers, and the information will be on your screen then for how you can do that. So the money goes, it's also in the chat right now. Thanks, Sarah. So that money goes straight to the readers, and we ask that you do kick in $5 so that they can be paid. Okay, and without further ado, I am going to introduce Peter Dimock. I want to start by telling a story about the first time I met Peter Dimock. We'd gathered in a small group over a pizza in Brooklyn, and at some point Peter told a simple story about being a kid, remembering the feeling of eating pizza and the naga hide of the stools, and the particular air that filled the particular room in the particular instant of the particular history that formed the horizon of his particular being. I remember noticing that I didn't understand how he had managed to convey so much by saying what he'd said. Soon thereafter, I read Peter's first novel, 1998's A Short Rhetoric for Leaving the Family, and I understood that it hadn't just been the intoxicating magic of the pizza that had made his story so weirdly powerful. Peter Dimock's feel for language is one of the most interesting, sensitive, polyvalent, and indescribable of any artist's relationship to their material that I'm aware of in any medium. Recently, someone described to me the process of spinning wool into thread and how you loosen and tighten it by hand while feeding it into a machine that gathers the fibers into a pattern. And I immediately thought of Peter's writing and its relationship to time, how he finds ways for us to experience the unlivable history we are actually living, gathering it into threads that reveal new dimensions, buried affects, elusive continuities, both pleasurable and horrific. In thinking by this textile metaphor, I'm sure I'm partly influenced by Toni Morrison, who wrote that Peter's writing, quote, possesses the rich, intricate, and subtle patternings of the verbal lacemaker's craft. I had met Peter at the start of my own career in book publishing, and I would soon learn that he was also a legendary book editor. He'd worked with Toni Morrison and had traveled with her to Stockholm to collect the 1993 Nobel Prize. After working with Peter, Angela Davis wrote that his, quote, skills and humanity defy description. He'd also worked with Amartya Sen, Eric Hobsbawm, Robin D.G. Kelley, too many authors to list. The Egyptologist John Romer writes that the pyramids, this is going somewhere. The Egyptologist John Romer writes that the pyramids were not built through the implementation of designs. Rather, there was an entire model of civilization that funneled energy into the social enterprise of pyramid building. Individual pyramids came up by hand at the direction of on-site craftspeople whose craft was the overall management of the innumerable, intricately correlated activities that coalesced to produce a giant limestone triangle in the desert. Peter's feel for the book as a historically contingent, deeply and invisibly structured artifact of a civilization that until recently viewed itself as funneling energy into the social enterprise of book production has made him not just an editor of rare gifts, but a remarkable thinker on the book as an intellectual, social, and indeed economic unit. He has written widely and led regular left forum panels on the role of publishing in an age of cybernetics, racial capitalism, and unaccountable empire. This sense is also, of course, crucial to Peter's 3 novels, which go stinging and singing deep into the recent history of American empire. A Short Rhetoric for Leaving the Family was followed in 2013 by George Anderson, Notes for a Love Song in Imperial Time. The book created not exactly a critical sensation, but something closer to a critical angelic moment, a thing whose obvious weird integrity, radical historic perceptiveness, and fresh New England music landed like a soft rain in the desert of capitalist realism and inspired something like mass awe from reviewers at major outlets and cool small journals alike. If you didn't catch the reception of that novel, if you want to see like something that does not happen in the world of trade publishing, like check out the reviews that book got all over the place. I notice I've been talking for a while and I haven't really described or quoted from the novels themselves yet. That is not easy to do. They take specific and unusual form, and I think it's better to discover that by reading than to hear me describe it to you. I will say that central to Peter's work is the assertion that, quote, Americans lack a language adequate to the history we are living, which is catastrophic and due in some large measure to the subjective internalization of a historical narrative of national triumph. At the same time, he's also an author who writes, love, I told her, could only exist in one true action whose independent value was as immediate as the hollow spaces inside a sparrow's wing, all motion away to cancel loss. And also, there is a politics of lyric behind each moment's breath to which words are never adequately accountable. Peter's work rehabilitates melody as a tool for calibrating one's relationship to remembering and forgetting, which is also to say one's relationship to value. Peter's latest book is Daybook from Sheep Meadow, The Notebooks of Talis Martinson, forthcoming from Deep Vellum on June 8th. I'm going to now attempt the complex maneuver of dropping a link in the chat in the event that you would like wisely to pre-order it. Now I gotta go back and find where I was, sorry. Oh no, it skipped around. Peter's latest book is Daybook from Sheep Meadow, The Notebooks of Talis Martinson, forthcoming on June 8th. Like his earlier novels, it finds a voice for the limitless complicity of the American imperial class in the language of madness and proposes new ways of relating to the history we continue impossibly to live. It mediates and moves as no books but Peter Dimock's do, as it frames through a meticulous interspersal of materials and musics the struggle to hold a mind together under an entire model of civilization that funnels energy into the social enterprise of drone warfare. A fall into history, as he says. The ethical stakes of Peter Dimock's writing are ultimately, I think, pretty simple. Reciprocity, the fundamental imperative to understand that the other is also oneself, is, I think, near the core of his worldview. In voicing the subjectivity, first crazed, then fragmented, of its disavowed coherence, he continues to produce a body of work like absolutely no other. Peter Dimock is an author and editor. He used to live in Brooklyn, but now he lives upstate. His 3 books are A Short Rhetoric for Leaving the Family and George Anderson, Notes for a Love Song in Imperial Time, both from Dalkey Archive Press, and Daybook from Sheep Meadow, forthcoming in just a couple weeks from Deep Vellum Publishing. He's an amazing person to share a pizza with, and it is very urgent that you presently and all the way lose your mind to welcome the great Peter Dimock.
Ian, what am I supposed to do now, Ian? After that kind of introduction, I just, I thank you deeply for your belief in me. And if I could live up to it, that would be one thing. But you have named this sort of the dream of a self I would love to be. And so if I will live up to that dream as much as I can. And thank you enormously for that introduction. It is a great honor to be reading here this afternoon with Lisa Jarnot. I want to thank Artist Space and Segue Reading Series for inviting me to introduce my new novel, Daybook from Sheep Meadow, the notebooks of Talis Martinson. I would like to take this opportunity also to thank from the bottom of my heart all the people at Deep Vellum Publishing. I would especially like to thank its founding editor, Will Evans, a book publisher who is creating a new kind of space for making, reaching, and circulating, for the making, reading, and circulating of contemporary literature. Without Will, I very much doubt my novel would have found a public forum in which to be sympathetically heard. So I urge you to see what Will is doing and what his colleagues are doing at Deep Vellum Publishing. And I think it has the breadth and the feel of a future that is in formation, and it's a wonderful breath of fresh air, and it's a real surprise, and heartening one for me at least. Okay, let me introduce my novel to you if I can. The setup is this: Talis Martinson, the author, is the author of Notebooks. He is a respected American historian who is considered to have written in 3 successful volumes the definitive narrative of civil-military relations in US history. While testifying as an expert witness in April of 2010 before a House subcommittee hearing, he suffers a nervous breakdown. The subject of the hearing is the legality of the use by the United States of armed drones for targeted assassinations. Talis eventually commits himself indefinitely to a long-term psychiatric care facility. He has been diagnosed with what the doctors call severe adult selective mutism with occasional apparent symptoms of malignant catatonia. His younger brother, Christopher Renthrow Martinson, who is also his editor, is trying to decipher the cause of his collapse. Christopher does this in part by putting together a selection of entries from Talis's notebooks, which Talis has been keeping for many years. Talis began writing these after he experienced a quasi-vision at around 2 p.m. on November 3rd, 2003. He'd been resting in Sheep Meadow in Central Park on his way back to his apartment after a late lunch. His vision took place, he notes in one of his entries, on a record-setting warm Monday afternoon, 8 months after the beginning of the Iraq War. Since then, the notebook entries have continued for the next 11 and a half years, until early April 2015. By the late fall of that year, Talis has fallen almost completely silent and has voluntarily committed himself to long-term psychiatric care. Most of the selections I will be reading are from Talis's notebook entries themselves and not the surrounding annotation provided by Christopher. This is the best way of conveying the sound of my book, I think, in 20 minutes. What you will be hearing, in other words, is mostly the madness in it. But the book implies that the human language faculty, if not literature, provides access to a persisting possibility of joyful transcendence. That transcendence is entangled in the missed connections between the brothers, which the notebook entries negotiate. That transcendence is made from unpredetermined inventions of reciprocity. These inventions, my novel claims, sustain value, even beyond the reach of the exterminatory history we are living. I will start at the very beginning of the book. It's an introduction by Christopher to the excerpts from his brother's notebook, selections from his brother's notebooks. And he titles his introduction, Learning to Practice My Brother's Method. And he has an epigraph for it, which is a fragment from the first entry of the notebooks. The epigraph reads, "A broken going on being, for which there is remedy in speech offered in air, to welcome the immediacy of another's infinite value." I decided to learn to practice my brother's method after I found 3 entries from his notebooks transcribed onto a folded and frayed sheet of ordinary typing paper. The folded white sheet lay loose inside one of the 3 boxes that held all 126 of his handwritten notebooks. I still often recite these entries to myself from memory. April 28, 2004. This use of time, water over stones, the sound of it as if this were victory, an overturning, an uncovering, this catastrophe, this action, a gesture, restraining apocalypse. For the ear, there is never an end to hearing. For the eye, never an end to seeing. Now is the time for order and for carrying children in our hearts like words, for speech in a landscape in which the painted bird sings, then flies. I should say here that each entry in the notebooks comes with a template, what Tallis calls a template marking. This is the result of Tallis's elaborate, privately invented Baroque system for generating the entries in the first place. The templates are to be used, Tallis explains, in mediating, they're to be used, he explains, in meditating on the entries and generating new associations from them as they're read. And as the templates can be shifted, and depending on which template is applied to which entry, the reader and is invited to associate the meanings of make associations with the entries on a different basis. And the goal of remember that he's in a psychiatric, that he's now living in a psychiatric or temporarily living in psychiatric care. But the goal of his system, he says, is an entirely new method of practicing historical justice. Okay, I'll go back to these entries that Christopher is using, has memorized and is using to introduce his brother's book. November 7th, 2004. Sweetness in the bone, a new kind of light. This failure of democracy and the success of empire, a lust past all possession fulfilled in light, a violence no one wanted to survive, an ecstasy of unanswerable force past every betrayed possibility of reciprocity. I felt my thought, an ordinary ecstatic American perception, become one. April 2nd, 2005. For meditations on historical justice, it is helpful to memorize verbatim the following strict, formal definition of language and keep it refreshed in the mind so that it is always ready for spontaneous use. Language is a combinatorial system capable of generating an unbounded number of creative expressions, interpretable at 2 interfaces, the cognitive intentional and the sensory motor, roughly thought and sound. That's actually taken from a linguistics book by Robert Berwick and Noam Chomsky, published in 2016. And this book is full of quotes, and the bibliography is listed at the end of the novel. Sorry, I will go on to 25. July 10th, 2013. My artificial ecstasy of vision in Sheep Meadow on Monday, November 3rd, 2003. Let yourself see this. The unarmed black helicopter with no markings hovers deafeningly above the field in which all the couples stand beside their small children and embrace each other. Some standing, some prone. In the sudden summer warmth of November's surprising sun. The temperature that afternoon reached a record high of 79 degrees Fahrenheit by 1 p.m. The poet sings from the side of the hill beneath a terraced tree, while the helicopter's loud rotors create a maddening, illiterate wind. Everyone suddenly understands that the loud noise provides cover for the sound of the co-pilot's voice inside the helicopter's cockpit, calling the drone strike in. I'll now read a little bit from some of the commentary, Christopher's commentary, the annotation of one of the of one of the selections, one of the entries. Christopher's annotation says, after successfully beginning my compilation of selections from my brother's notebooks, I suddenly became stuck for a whole year. I could not proceed. After a year of not knowing why I was stuck, I decided to give up on the entire project. It was at this moment that I suddenly experienced the intense memory of the following scene. It was a memory I could not remember having brought to consciousness in over 30 years. The event I am referring to occurred in either 1955 or 1956, I'm not sure which. I am 5 or 6 years old and looking up into the wild, terrified, abject cruelty and violence of unresponsiveness, an annihilating coldness of the eyes of our grandfather, Tallis Martinson Sr. His gaze is his incomprehensibly unreciprocating answer to my own spontaneous look's attempt to express the unprotected depth of my love for him. My joy in him is that he is the father of my father, Justin Martinson, his firstborn son. Therefore, I am his. I am trying with my look to honor him as my father's and my own invaluable, indispensable, unbounded source. Grandfather Tallis was born in 1891. He and I are alone and standing in the summer afternoon light on the banks of a pond in upstate New York. He is supposed to be taking me fishing, but I can see now he only wants to return to the house to be by himself at his desk, cutting out scenes of animals from hunting magazines. He is desperate and enraged and suffocating. My look has interfered with his failing internal efforts to suppress his constant, terrified rage. I am overwhelmed with the knowledge that something in me has failed him. This sudden memory gave me access to another memory from later that same year. Sometime in October, a few miles from the same pond, I am standing in the back of my grandparents' Buick sedan, holding onto the back of the front seat as we travel along a dirt road through a second growth forest. Again, it was in late afternoon light. My grandmother was driving. Her lips were quivering. I'd first noticed this newly acquired habit a few days previously. Suddenly, grandfather, who was sitting beside her in the front seat, ordered her, impatiently, angrily, to stop the car. His voice sounded both excited and panicked. As he reached beside him on the seat, I saw for the first time the stock of the breached double-barreled shotgun resting there, barrels pointing at the car floor. The next thing I knew, I was standing beside him outside the car, looking up to his face as he silently aimed the gun at the sky. A loud, dry clatter of wings had just risen from the underbrush beside the road. After the second explosion, I saw an object falling from the sky. It fell straight down with a terrifyingly swift finality of unwinged, weighted catastrophe. Moments before, I had felt the rush of Maggie, my grandfather's retriever, bumping me in her frenzied leap from the car's open back door. With what I experienced then and still think now was love, Maggie leaped to retrieve the fallen bird and carry it back to grandfather in her soft mouth. Maggie's trembling body seemed to express an ecstasy of purest joy. In one breath, grandfather cursed her and himself for missing his first shot, her for leaving before he had given her the permission of his command. My grandmother did not get out of the car. The trip home was filled with a tense, desolate silence that radiated a violence I had never before encountered. With the remembering of this scene came the realization that I had never spoken of this event to anybody. I realize now, as I try to reconstruct the occasion's details, that Talas must have been with me. I hope to ask him about this when he recovers. I will not be at all surprised if he says he remembers that afternoon perfectly. If so, I will ask him why we have never once spoken of it to each other in all these intervening years. November 7th, 2004. This painting instead, Hieronymus Bosch's triptych of Anthony's temptations, the ecstasies of them, the naked woman in the hollow tree draped in crimson cloth, all her beauty forfeit. All the cities are burning, all the writings are snares. The sudden immediacy of God's presence in the human heart. This subjectivity was made possible, some say, by the influence of the Desert Fathers on popular consciousness after subjection to Roman occupation and rule. This immediacy of God's unlettered presence has become the new text to be deciphered. Before Anthony's example, the Church Fathers' authority had been derived from mastery of philosophical writings, Christian and pagan, preserved on the expensive pages of rich men's codices. January 27th, 2012. Print literacy's fixed point of view enforces the deferment of justice until some narrative end to all of history. Until then, we victors are off the hook, accidental enablers of perfection behind the back of our own actions in collusion with the state, however criminal its official acts formally may be judged to be at the end. By then, we will have learned to repent and achieve the reconciliation necessary for final victory. I'm going to read two more entries. I'll read now the final entry in the notebooks, and it's dated April 5th, 2015. Birds at an angle of flight. Something is falling there beneath them, inside a place of thought. Saint Michael will lead all God's armies of light. By what sign will his certain victory over every evil be made manifest? Oh, to be among his foot soldiers on that day. The last section I'll read comes from an entry that's 2 days before that final entry. It's from April 3rd, 2015. Our innocence is criminal. In an age of finance, until historical justice is funded, we cannot pretend to be committed to a democracy. We arrive at the limits of our historical self-knowledge without the immediacy of the presence of each other. The Spanish visitor will buy the triptych for his private chapel. These unmoored reveries from Sheep Meadow have lost touch with any original promise of a restored democratic commons of plenty derived from a costly victory over dearth. Will our senses be able to perform the work of a messianic eschatology just before the missiles strike? Saint Michael at the head of God's three armies. In the far distance, the tiny merchant ship burns on the water, providing unintentionally the illumination of an actual event. This sound of wind in the trees as accompaniment for my burning mind. Thank you so much for letting me introduce my book to you and with this section of the reading. I'm very grateful to be here, and I look forward to hearing Lisa and to the discussion afterwards. Thanks so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Peter. That was really wonderful. Yeah, I'm a little speechless. That was great. And I was so happy looking, we have a great crowd, and I was noticing also among many names I don't know and people I was glad to see, a number of people are here who I have written about your work. I was so happy to see Hilary Plum and Eugene Lim, and I know there was at least one other person. Oh, Jim Supanik. Probably other people too. Just so great. Anyway, sorry. That was fantastic. We're going to take just like a cool 5 minutes for you to do in your home that which you must do. We're going to give you the information on the screen to tip in your $5 via PayPal or Venmo. And then we're going to be back very, very soon. And Tasso will introduce Lisa Jarnot.
Welcome back. Thank you, Peter, for that amazing reading. And next up is Lisa Jarnot. Before I get underway to introduce, as the placards say, next week, it'll be Asya Wadood and Kay Gabriel. So be sure to check that one out. And I think that's it. I don't know if I need to announce anything else. So I will announce Lisa Jarnot. As much as I can't promise that this will be a good introduction, I can promise that this will be a bad introduction, because I'm nervous to introduce such a poet and such a poetry whose every new book makes my moused hand quake at the available for pre-order screen, and because her poetry's proximity to my own understanding of poetry is so close, it feels almost unapproachable to talk about, like Charlotte Smith's lunatic staring into the ocean. Her poetry leaves me uncursed with reason. In part, I am uncursed with reason because her poetry is so carefully attentive to not just the line or even the word, but always the phoneme or the smallest bite of sound, always in transition as it morphs into the next, such that each word composed of phonemes feels like a complete prayer already, the next word remixing into another prayer altogether, as in Gang Angles, a poem in Black Dog Songs, where she writes lanes and gardens, lanes and grange, angles, angels, grease rags, sage, aged glades, an eagle grange, a green deer land lease, seed sage lane. Here the infinitesimal sound prayers connect heaven, landscape, work, property, time, and more, all with the tiny seam of pure sound. The phonic connective or phonic force as a process of understanding contrasts with Enlightenment reason in a similar way as Jarnot, in her recent lecture titled White Whales, White Men, White Head, distinguishes between knowing in the academic way and knowing in the way people know each other in the Bible. The transcendental loner is uncursed in favor of the immanentized social presence. Further along in Black Dog Songs, Jarnot remixes Stein along similar lines, writing, I am of a family because my dog knows me. Here knowledge is not for the sake of mere being, but is already being with a community. And it again is that knowledge in the way people know each other. I like to think of the community of sounds of Jarnot's poems then within this social vein. Perhaps then each poem is the gathering of a group of friends at a drunken vernal festival, a Zoom birthday, a going away party, etc. And in some way, this may be what drives the writing of the poems as well, as so much of Jarnot's parties integrate the overheard into collages and co-languages. My friend Will writes to me, I really love her stuff. Her knack for collage and her sincerity within it is rare, I think, a way many of those poems read like letters to loved ones. Her poetry or language then begin in the party, is remixed by the poet and DJ, and then passed as a secret message to the reader in the same party. But for all this gifting and regifting of language between friends, Jarnot is also at a meetup with extinction in her poetry. And later in the talk I mentioned earlier, she says, there's something really beautiful about the fact that we don't need to be here. I like poetry that feels like it doesn't need me to be there with it too. That's what I said in this introduction. She elegizes in her most recent edition of Princess Magic Presto Spell, which is this beautiful cover and book. Yes, she elegizes in her most recent edition of Princess Magic Presto Spell in the final poem, Trim Roses, Mary, writing, dust and spirit in the cavernous eyes of our dead cat help to immanentize the eschaton toward a fruit-based strangeness. Perhaps it is this combination of these two aspects, which seem at least on the surface incompatible, the party of the poem and the poem which shows language doesn't need me, that has kept me in the loop with Jarnot's poetry throughout the years. On the subject of counting and years, these later poems, collected so far in 9 parts, are generated through a concretized writing with between Jarnot and her daughter, as they both came into a language with one another and are assembled about annually. The facing with life and its futurity has allowed the facing with extinction at the level of the word to become even more pronounced in these poems. Jarnot writes such grieving stanzas as D in death under the space between will and remember, alongside a rivulet rabbit named Tyrone, ballet class, first words, and more, in a way that reminds me of the type of biography or life writing that Stein pursues in her autobiographies. Not the writing of life, but the life of writing, which thereby allows for the possibility that a particular conception of life doesn't foreclose possibilities of poetic freedom in encountering different or alien forms of living and dying. Jarnot continues to show with perfectly professional propheticism that the meeting point of the vital poetic party and the facing of extinction is not a closed question of what will survive, but rather an open question of how to survive, imbibe, and allow the fear of extinction a place in the party of life. Or as Jarnot writes, birth and death, snow and snow, in the night, in the dark, in the solstice, Vernichtungsbang, fear of extinction. Lisa Jarnot is the author of Princess Magic Presto Spell, parts 1 through 9, Flood Editions, 2019, Joie de Vivre, Selected Poems from City Lights, Night Scenes, and Black Dog Songs from Flood Editions, along with others. Her book, Robert Duncan, The Ambassador from Venus, was nominated for a National Book Critics Circle Award, and she lives in New York City with her daughter. I think she's still in New York City right now. Please join me in virtually, silently applauding, welcoming, going nuts for Lisa Jarnot.
Thank you, Tazo. Wow. I have to bask for a minute, and that was so sweet. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here, and I'm so glad to be reading with Peter. I am going to read from this most recent book, Princess Magic Presto Spell. And as Peter was reading, I was thinking, oh, this is very interesting because on the surface, these look like 2 really different projects. But in fact, I think the essence is very similar. When I started writing this book, it was an attempt to write a book-length poem, which was something I had never done before and seemed almost impossible to do with an infant in the house, but somehow it was made more possible by having an infant in the house because I could do nothing but be a mom and have a pencil and a notebook in front of me, and also baby food and diapers. but nothing else was happening. So, and a lot was happening. And Peter was talking about a couple of things that really stood out to me: transcendence and that potential that we have to connect with each other which is so important and is all we have really. And in the midst of this dystopia that we live in, as we've now are experiencing through our little Zoom screens. I was also thinking about one of the first readings I gave for SEG, which was, I think, over on East 8th Street in the studio right above the basement where all the books were. So I feel old. I was just thinking that the hardest part for me about reading used to be that I would get nervous. The hardest part now is that I can't see the page. So I guess it's a trade-off. So I'll read for about 20 minutes. And this work unfolds as life unfolds. My kid turned 12 2 days ago. She's now, I'm actually in Park Slope right now, and she's out in Prospect Park with her buddies and has absolutely no interest in what's going on in here. So, but this is for her. Into the eve of a picnic of trees of the strawberry rugolet rabbit Tyrone, into a glazed economic disturbance caused by the rain, most dramatic and strange. Small whole moon in the sky, fish-like in semblance, as damp as an amphibrac, the Anthony Braxton gland of ant launch. Wind-blown shutters, angry household gods, wet September horses, Schubert's Trout Quintet, shy Franz Schubert. 2 German shepherds, Al-Qaeda in Flushing, and Earth's microphone willy-nilly. Into the eve of multitudinous seas in Carnadine, all one word, shy Franz Schubert, Yuki Lily Atkins, feverish Hippo Zion, fallen giraffe incident, and the mysteries. Christ, death, genitals, the stimulation phase, salivation of the lamb, William, partridge, orange, boring Dutch milkmaid, the paranormal finger of 7 West 46th Street's aristocratic vagueness panda. With tender purloined sunlight at winter's lip, specializing in yellow starlings in flight over Arthur's Seat. This very linty cow, that useless Tibetan babysitter. The prime meridian, a pale dead moose in the sky, into the eve of a picnic of trees of the strawberry rugolet rabbit Tyrone. Tenemos par chinches, Helen Mirren naked, running from what? The wild screaming beaches of the ancient mariner, his Dutch husband and 4 mosques, the by and ermine trouser snake over the rainbow of red meat hedonism, get rich quick, lose weight now, Pasha Parker penguin. Waves of sleep, a lovely Lincoln, albuterol, first snow. This state-sponsored car alarm, my lost mason jar, this lonely bird, autumnal burnings, Duncan's, cold and clear. While slyly coffee hangs outside below a wall of snow. On bodega dust include emancipatory relationships, Odyssea's very original boobs, and the warm, apt facts of John Thaw, ham, and train stations. Register individual Mayweed, Harvey, Jack and Bob, Robert, Jess and Stan, Anne's Red Noir, Lonely Frank O'Hara, perpetual free actuaries, almost actual giraffe, humorless minimalist, electronica, very linty cow, American medicated individualists, Vivian Rose champions delicate Victorian ankles. Leap over a large rock splendored with April moss. For the sea, sailing, and the French Revolution. Pines and pineapples. Gumming finger food and wintercress with weapons-grade literature. His fiancée Jane sewing chickens together, the sparrows in the cherry tree, the hedgehogs in the chanterelle bin, Locust and Bartleby, first two worlds, blender, air conditioner, guinea pig, and the pedestrian on Queens Boulevard. A wriggler eye, all of nature, an occasional seagull, Howth Castle environs. A pale dead moose in the sky, an idiot in a cat suit, an Afghan emir, the Persian Empire, and two Matildas. Cher dumps me in a dream, a disregarded entity in Wigham's forest. A titty rizzle, after the Z, after the E, a luminous simultaneity. Silver and hearts, Prophet Muhammad in a bear suit. An omelet corner, my actual entity, my baby bear, my presentational immediacy, my beach plum, in blue lobelia for Mary Osborne, this year and the next, that is scented vaguely of potatoes. The lemon sun in the sky, the silver cat in the Nepeta, and Lewis's mother, William Blake's mother, Sun Ra's space world, the sixth extinction, this Peter's banjo, that Alan's harmonium. What do you know about chickens, about sadness and raspberry jam, and the 100,000 songs of Milarepa? A molecular empathy, plinkets of sunlight connecting all the stars. Old-fashioned hominid, yes, to have a favorite place. Into the eve of a picnic of trees of the strawberry rugulet rabbit Tyrone. Contemplative roommate wanted, no snow globes. That new things happen in the equinox with a baby named Ellington, Brad Will's laundry in a dream. Call me Hester, drooping Joe Pye weed. For her now, a wood mite, white, sweet clover. Pale dead tree in the sky, the world imperfect, while bumblebees breakfast in the lamb's ears stalks. Own some land, have some trees, Google in Indonesia in a dream. Land of wheels dominated by sycamores. We talked about fish for hours. Then sudden rain. Forgotten monkey amber. The catalpa tree, alder, hazel, pine. An italic gate, an antediluvian world, deep metaphysical fatigue, beautiful but stupid, and Thule also. That we slip into and out of the world, companions, mud, adversity. Two snow monkeys, two rabid beavers, poor Franz Kafka. These ancient macaroons and huge Victorian fairies. My baby bear, my gorgeous goose, my beach plum. An occasional lycanthropy McDonald's in Leroy with ghost-free rooms, white sweet clover, waters of night. Part 3 is called Everybody's Bacon. Eating the carrots, I'm happy like this. I don't wear underwear. I love pizza. I think about guppies all the time. Pale fawn fluff of these first winter beans, of George V's 1,000 pheasants, of those morning glories, those peach trees, those rainstorms, and those floods. Not a gibbon, not a gorilla, just a new moon waxing, squiggly and recalcitrant, where the sun is getting up, so up yours. Poor night owl, white snake root. A cat's empty bowl places the stars in the sky. I'm a quiet drunk, a timid bicyclist, a decent gardener. I'm a mama dressed up like a papa, an orning mug, a hungry bud, a hypoepic nodule of occult origin. I display 9 reservations about the sprawling metropolis. Can you believe that this is a beautiful house? It has toys and butterflies and cups. Poor half moon in the sky, fearless and joyful, with monks, not monkeys. Into the eve of a picnic of trees of the strawberry rugolet rabbit Tyrone. Sahasra Enzo rust in an otterbox of solstice coot. Look at that beautiful child glowing in the night. For small art, for Saxon churches, defiant lightness, take a restless optimism, a wanky thing, and Peel's Mastodon. Find the train to Cockfosters, the hearth smoke, the bread, the nettles, the starlings eating puke. Take the sock poet, for example, that other smashed pine cone, those three kings' camels, the word Malvis in a dream. Remember Dave's Wang and Abner's ashes and Paul Revere. In the war, I have made a celestial cave, a big womble, a Liverpool Wappingen picture, an annual guide to Jewish genetic diseases. In the war, I have made a femme pop ass crack cancer of the whole rabbit coming, of the grackles in the ramble at the rabbi's house. Say pancakes, carrots, and nutcases, pink chimpanzees, a massalinging hoko. Greet the first autonomous art of the equinox. Write silly gilly gumball. Be not in the mood of crab, not in the mood of octopus, not in the mood of avocado, of starlings in flight in a dream. With the chickens, they have made a celestial cave, with Dr. Bragg's Anubis, with corn, oars, honey, and the door. Write silly gilly gumball, a chamomile blue jay, and lactose intolerant Neanderthals. To wash it with toast, the chillingly dark song of a Hero Ed Park tree hest stick conkle salami pirate vessel. I see their little lanterns. I say their little slither. I like tripping so rainbows come out of my mouth. I'm pregnant with guinea pigs and hamsters and trees. And when the honey rises, they make honey shoes. A Wilkinson Wallachia that causes all the meows. I will line up in the sentence merrily, crossfire, when I was big like I am. I see montage for mortgage, a cigarette, roses and poop, Jamaica for Judaism, a bank Robert in Spitzer's walnut room. I see the coronal ejection mass of the Helleborgism of the ancients, of my bird Fred, of Henry Needham Carpenter, of Petrinkus the Frog, the premier Posick of a generation. I will line up in the sentence of this lonely vehiculate, a day turning toward evening, a midsummer cacophony of peaches, hydrangeas, and bees. Of Vanya, oh, and Anka Tudor, a princess magic presto spell. Part 6, the Derby Shuffle. Teeming with life, a midsummer kitten, Mars hangs low over guns, rape, and great white sharks. Teeming with life, the sumac trees lighting Flushing Bay. Rendered into death, the angel Moroni. Teeming with life, roaches, fruit flies, ants, hairballs, ringworm, fleas. Dr. P samples elevated bilirubin. From Grobbins to Lederer, from Lurcher to Malenko. Teeming with life, an oval pigtoe, an Arkansas fat mucket, a Cumberland monkey face. Over the road, Harvey, Jack, and Bob, Robert, Jess, and Stan, the dog days, and then rotifer. If you speak Chinese, press 22. Become a dementia swimming officer, a blue reeds Lou mask. Teeming with life, Sumida Ben Mocha, a thing in a castle in a Kafka story. Being in life, sound bites, iPhones, psyches. Fussy German beekeeper, may you live in interesting times. With global liquidity funds, South African asparagus, with rigid bureaucratic behavior for God, Han, Hannah, and also for Bill Kushner. For emancipated, read emaciated in the Georgia pine woods, or a little boat in rainy weather under the drawbridge on Grand Avenue, the Metro Dong ferry. For Hopkins-esque, read Urinalysis, and a pear-shaped white lady crafted from the pelts of North American coyotes. Office Max, Copy Max, Furniture Max, the last days of the Standard Enzyme Company. Teeming with life, these sober engines dreaming. The last days of the rare full moon of Christmas Eve in Galesburg. For Garage, read Carnage. My mother's hairspray, my father's aftershave, and Nino Scalia, free at last. Starved on the frozen streams wander the water voles. With short Mexican pussies, with small Welsh feet, with sea trout Francis, with red maple buds, teeming with life, the redolent eyes of firstborn seers and Lady Choppy wine, teeming with life, a wild boar in an oak tree. For Tequila Minsky and Mr. Rojek and Dr. Berthoff, Robert J. For Discord or current resident, 11 officers down. Part 9, Trim Roses, Mary. Dust and spirit in the cavernous eyes of our dead cat help to immanentize the eschaton toward a fruit-based strangeness with the head of a girl, with the snake of a body at the Erie County Fair. In the Synod of Dort, find a solitude near the chessmen and the tax returns where the llamas dream. In a luxury gay space communism, find a dead woods post-colonial guerrilla exegesis. In the mobs of vindicators, find the root fallacy of the music that can carry it. And for weird but true, read The World Tree. Read The Crows of Boulder. Read The Magpies of London. Read Archaic Tribal Garbage or an original Christology. And then Jack, and then Bobby, and then Jeffrey's Bridge, and then Corbett's Ashes. In the funerals, dentists, divorces, in the brain masala and Bima astrologers, be a brilliant heliotrope in a flannel waffle hemp. Read the welfare queen's strawberry unicorn cakes, her bare Buick rusting. No ding dongs, no sea gods, and more Toms outbound. Thank you.
Clap towards my mic.
Yeah, wow.
Lisa, for reading. Amazing to hear you. Very grateful for that.
I can't help but observe, Tasso, that your agenda didn't lie. It's May 8th. We had an incredible reading.
Yeah, the agenda never lies. You just have to check it.
You just have to check. All right. Can everybody in their homes just like jump up and down one more time for Peter Dimock and Lisa Jarnot, please? Just, we can't see you, but we can feel that you're doing it. And I think
jump out of whatever sheltered space you're in.
Yeah, just
leave it.
yeah.